Welcome to Eye to Market, a web series designed to help you explore and navigate the successful path to market for your ophthalmic innovation. Welcome to Eye to Market. My name is Brian and I'll be your host. In this episode, we're going to talk about building a solid go-to-market strategy and ramping up for a successful launch. Let's make it happen.
So when you think about the go-to-market strategy, there's a couple of pillars you really have to think about. One is the prescriber level, one is the payer level, one is the patient level. And you really have to think about all those things are going to come in sync in one time at a launch strategy. So when I think about it from a strategic perspective is what I'm looking for is a couple of things. From a prescriber standpoint is really the value proposition that a prescriber has. And it really has to be fundamentally be based on data. Clinical differentiations matter because that ultimately, from our perspective, patient being the North Star has to see the benefit of the product. From an access standpoint, again, reverting back to value. The value for a payer is going to be very different than a prescriber because a payer has to look at this technology or innovation about how they're going to pay for it. And the value proposition has to be based on innovation. And what does it mean from an access standpoint, from a cost perspective? Makes this technology very different than what's available today. So from a company perspective, I think a successful launch go-to-market strategy has to be fundamentally based on these three pillars. If you do these things very perfectly or actually very pointed, you'll have a very successful launch. What I find in my experience is some folks really overcompensate with a prescriber, but maybe not on the patient side, or they focus on the access side, but not on the prescriber side. All those things have to come together for a successful launch.
So how do you align those pieces? So we're talking pricing, access, sales strategy. How do we take those pieces and bring them together? Sure. Is there a proven strategy to make that happen, or is it unique for every product?
I think there's an element of uniqueness, but I think that fundamentally has to do, you start early. I think when you think about market access, you cannot start thinking about that when you have the product approved. That's too late. Most companies actually think about the go-to-market strategy around phase 2. When they have their product, they know they're going to go phase 3. They have an idea about the clinical profile. They understand the safety aspect of it. That's when you start kind of building these pillars, right? And that alignment really starts really, really early on, because by the time you come to launch, those things have to be in gear, but more importantly, they have to be in line with what you've thought about from a clinical perspective. So the alignment actually happens really very early in the product development standpoint, but you really have to think about this also, not in a horizon in the next 3 years, but 5 to 10 years, right? Because what we do know, access changes, for example, patient needs change, prescriber demographics change, right? So you really have to be thinking about this forward, future-looking perspective of having a market strategy that's based not only about at launch, but in the next 3 to 5 years.
As we're starting early in this process, it's phase 3 or even phase 2, and we're thinking about our commercial go-to-market strategy, what are some of the biggest risks or pitfalls that you've seen in your career that our audience can be thinking about as they're working on this plan and start planning to avoid those Sure. risks?
Look, the way I look at it is, as a commercial leader, part of my job is actually think about a worst-case scenario. And what I find is most people are focusing on the ideal scenario, right? What I tell our teams consistently is, what I do know about a launch strategy is, you can have a best strategy day one. It's going to go out the door as soon as you launch the product. Something's going to change. You have to be able to pivot. You have to change, right? Mm-hmm. So from a thought standpoint, when you think about these issues you just raised, for example, manufacturing, absolutely, making sure you have enough product to sell, or making sure your process has quality assurances that you don't have any issues with any manufacturing complexities or quality issues there, right? From an access standpoint, you know access changes, right? You may not get an access curve you want from day one. So you have to be able to pivot your pricing strategy maybe from day one, or actually as you go into the next couple of years. So you really have to be thinking about, from a launch perspective, things that could potentially go wrong, and what your mitigation will be to address that. And what I've learned over the past years as I launch products is I'm constantly looking at how we launch, looking back on what things we did really well, and then learning from those mistakes to not to do them again for the second or third or fourth launch.
That's great advice, and I think that's another recurring part of the conversations that we've been having is finding the right people to lean on. Having advocates, advice givers, having consultants and experts you can lean on to help you understand how to avoid those pitfalls and learn from the experience of the ones before us.
Look, in a way, I think by the way I actually frame it for my team is, I call it having your own kitchen cabinet, right? In my career, I have a kitchen cabinet of folks who I've worked with over the years, some who work with me today, some who work with me in the past. Different competencies, different functions, manufacturing, quality, CMC, regulatory, physicians that have different experiences, right? That kitchen cabinet concept is really important, right? Because you need to have a good sounding board. Sometimes that is in the company, but sometimes it is not. So you really have to ensure you build your own ecosystem to make sure you're learning from the best of the best.
We're ready to launch our product. We've got solid clinical trials, we've passed our regulatory, we've gotten approval from the FDA, and we are ready to go to market. So how does that differ? How are we building this go-to-market strategy, and how early in the process should we be looking at this true go-to-market strategy?
It's something that you can't ever start too early, in our opinion. The more that you have time to understand the clinical results as they're coming through, the more time you can spend with your advisors talking through the outcomes that you're seeing, the more time you can spend understanding the geographies. Where are the patients going to be? You have the largest density of those types of patients in the particular geographic market you're going after. Where are the surgeons? What are the practices? What kind of volumes do they have? The more time you have to research and understand that go-to-market opportunity and where's going to be the best investment of time and resources for that initial launch, the better. So my opinion is at least 12 months would be ideal, because there's a lot that has to come together. You can do it shorter than that.
Absolutely. I think the more time, the better. When it comes to the branding and marketing side of the house, at this point in time, I would hope we have, built and own a category. So if we're developing a new category, we're launching a new product, we've got to own this category and the concept. And you can have a lot of conversations in the med ed space where you're able to build this category, and then when you're ready to launch, you can swoop in and claim it and say, yes, there was a gap, I'm the gap filler, I'm prepared. So that I'd say hopefully you'd had enough time to build up to that point. You've got your brand locked in, you know what you're doing with your product, your packaging's all set. You're prepared with your messaging that's run through your advisors, you got physicians' input. You spend this time, this 12 months on building that content to prepare, to educate patients, to announce it to physicians, making sure they're prepared with training, all of that in advance. There's so much to work on, and the more time, the better, so that you can take as much input as possible from the trial, from the indication, the labeling that you're going to be receiving within, 30 days before launch. That's going to be really critical in preparing a solid go-to-market strategy.
And also, you need time to staff up.
Yeah.
Depending on what your go-to-market strategy is going to be, are you doing a beta test? Are you doing a full launch? You need to have time to get that sales team on board and get them trained. Because if you think about the education you need to do, you need to educate the market, but you also need to educate your team so that when they go out into practices, they can bring the product, and are there changes that have to happen in the practice workflow? Are there different elements that they need to be versant on when it comes to understanding how the diagnostics should be used? So there's a lot that you need to train your reps on to be ready to address when they go into market with your product, so that you have the best launch possible. So more time.
So in the earlier episode, one of the things we identified was pitfalls, right? Pitfalls and how we bring this data together and how we go to investors. And now we've got a different market, right? We're going straight to the customer now. So what are some of the biggest risks or pitfalls that people might face with a commercial launch, and what can they do to prepare to avoid them?
Well, again, from the marketing and branding perspective, when things don't launch at the same time or are inconsistent in the message that you're putting out there, the image that you're putting out there, it confuses the customer. They say it takes us 7 times to see something to actually act on it in advertising or marketing. It's the same thing. You're going to be hearing about this product, about the category that they're owning. You want to hear that consistent message coming from the KOL, or you're reading an article that comes out, or an email blast, or on their website. I need to be able to be taking in that information consistently over time and then adding value to what I'm walking away with.
I think another pitfall is assuming that you should launch your product the same way that somebody else did, because there's a lot of elements in that journey through commercialization that you need to consider. Are you the only product in a new market? Are you the fourth product to a mature market? What kind of resources do you have to launch? Are you a small team and you're looking to build that commercial business case to make you more attractive to an acquirer? I want to have a beta test, right? Or are you going into the hands of a large ongoing concern, or do you have the resources to staff up and have a large field team from the get-go? You're going to go faster. So you need to understand kind of what are the dynamics that are at play in your space. If you don't have competition, maybe you have the ability to go slower and do a beta test and really work out the kinks. There's so much you learn once you start getting into that commercial environment that really changes and helps you titrate and helps your reps sell better to the end customer because they understand the workflow better.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is if you're planning to self-launch the product versus maybe sell your asset off to a strategic partner of some sort, that the earlier you start this process, the better. Start building your messaging, identifying your market specifics, and then building in the team to build that message internally so that you're ready when you get your approval.
Yeah, and I wouldn't change that trajectory or that plan, even if you're looking to sell your company, because they're going to need to launch the product as well, and nobody's going to know your product as well as you do. So building that market strategy, that go-to-market plan, and those communications and those tools, you're still going to want to do that because you're the one that knows it the best. So then you're ready to go and you're not caught flat-footed. You can do it yourself, or your partner can step in and take that material and run with it. And I think making sure that you have really just ongoing consistent communication internally, and making sure all of the systems understand what's happening from marketing to quality to clinical to operations, fulfillment. You really need to understand, like, what is the actual customer journey, but what's your product journey? How are you going to be managing this process, making sure you're getting complaints handled? Hopefully you don't get them, but let's be honest, you're going to get them. And so what do you do? What's that process? Do you have the controls in to ensure that you have that sound business practice? And again, if you're like an early innovator, you don't know these things. So the right partner is going to help you make sure that you have that well-oiled machine and are able to bring your product to market with the least amount of disruption and challenge possible. There's no reason you should have to learn everything. There's a lot of people that have already learned a lot and can share.